Hi, I'm Jared Quint, and in this presentation I'll be analysing a 2008 study of linkages between internet and other media violence with seriously violent behaviour by youth. We'll take a brief look into the rationale, aim, hypothesis, participants, method, findings, conclusions and limitations of the study. Media violence has been proven to have a very strong correlation with physical aggression and violence in countless psychological studies. Not without rebuttal, mind you, as many researchers argue that the correlation does not prove causation due to the many variables that could and likely do contribute to physical violence. Regardless, the experimenters in this case took a stance that the correlation has been widely accepted, and hence the rationale for this experiment was to measure the impact that violent media may influence specifically upon serious youth violence, and hence its contribution towards seriously violent physical behaviour. By doing so, they were hopeful to provide findings that would provide useful information to assist in decreasing the effects of media violence on contributing to youths committing serious acts of violence. The aim of the study was to address the vast gap in previous studies of the link of media violence with serious violent or criminal behaviour. The definition of serious depicted by the US Department of Justice leaves it at simply murder, aggravated assault, robbery and sexual assault. Many studies have shown substantial evidence of short-term effects of violence in the media on arousal, thoughts and emotions. However, very little research has considered the link with seriously violent or criminal behaviour, particularly among youths. Additionally, the effects of violence in the media on aggressive behaviour seem to be particularly pronounced for younger children, but little research has considered the link for older children and adolescents. Just like in many previous studies focused on the impact of media violence upon physical aggression in consumers, the researchers hypothesised that there'd be a positive correlation between an increase in exposure to media violence and propensity to commit serious violent or criminal behaviour. Now, the study involved 1,588 children aged 10 to 15 years of age. They must all be able to read English and have used the internet in the past 6 months. They averaged 13 years of age, with 48% being female, 52% being male. They were spread across 72% were white, 12% black, 9% mixed and 7% other. Now, the study undertook a correlational design to measure the link between media violence with seriously violent behaviour. It interpreted the independent variable of each participant's exposure to violent media against a dependent variable of seriously violent or criminal behaviour being committed. The participants were obtained from the Harris Poll online opt-in panel, of which there's approximately 4 million members in America. There was an initial email contact made with randomly identified adults who'd previously indicated that a child lived in their household. Households were involved by using a stratified random sample design based on youth age and gender. Participants were tasked with answering an online questionnaire. They were encouraged to leave the survey and return to it at a later time if they weren't in a private space or they may have had the accuracy of their answers compromised. A Likert scale was adopted to determine the extent of each participant's seriously violent behaviour as well as their exposure to violent media. The primary technique for quantifying associations was a logistics regressions analysis. So what was found? 38% of youths reported exposure to one or more violent websites. So 3% reported exposure to 3 or more types of violent websites. The study found that the odds of reporting seriously violent behaviour increased 50% with each increase in the number of different types of violent website exposures that youths explored. Those that reported most or all of the websites that they visited depicted serious violence were 500% more likely to exhibit physically seriously violent behaviour, compared with those that reported that none of the websites they visited were violence-based. 2% of all participants surveyed reported committing serious violent acts. A compelling figure of 8% of participants who reported exposure to violence online reported committing seriously violent behaviour, compared with 4% of participants who reported little exposure to violent media on the web. It's exactly half. Exposure to violence in the media was found to have a strong correlation with reporting of seriously violent behaviour. And this only adds further fuel to the growing mass of evidence that previous studies have shown that there is a true association between media violence and physical violence. In this case, specifically seriously violent and criminal behaviour. It's fair to say that the hypothesis was proven within this study. Therefore, these findings are very relevant to encourage parents, guardians, educators, and the wider community to alter the consumption levels of media violence made available to youths and adolescents to combat seriously violent and criminal behaviour in our society. The correlative study undertaken allows associations to be identified, however, it can't really be definitively determined that violent media influence seriously violent behaviour. It's the age-old debate of whether correlation proves causation. By and large, researchers agree that it simply doesn't. In this study, there are numerous third variables that could account for participants' propensity to commit seriously violent acts. Most obvious for debate being that it cannot be determined which comes first. Perhaps violent exposure does indeed cause violent behaviour, or perhaps youths who are violent are more attracted to violent exposures. Further limiting this study is the fact it relied on self-reporting that can be prone to participants under-reporting or over-reporting their own seriously violent behaviour or their exposure to media violence. Adolescents are likely more prone than adults in this scenario to provide ill information. The most limiting factor of this study, though, is in fact its cross-sectional design. Obtaining the data at a single point in time leaves the conclusiveness of the data open to much dispute. Future studies should certainly utilise longitudinal experimental studies to assist in determining the true causality.